Hey everyone, I want to do something a little bit different than I typically do with our Defining Latin America discussion. Rather than respond to each of you or several of you in a lot of detail individually, I want to post this video that responds to a few of the main trends and threads that came to my mind and that I thought of as I read your work. I really enjoyed all of the insights that you all provided on the differing viewpoints on Latin America that Chasteen and Gobat present in their different pieces. I think that we have taken away quite a bit in terms of thinking about this place and this culture and this process, um, all of those things plural, that we're going to study over the rest of the semester. As Chasteen points out in his intro, um, one of the major questions that we have to think about as we start to approach Latin America is how can we even talk about a unified history for a place that has such a ranging diversity of cultures, of lived experiences, of languages, and of people? Um, some people would argue maybe you can't. I think Chastain is right to use themes in putting together his book. Those are the themes that we'll um, be focusing on a bit as we try to approach an answer for each of the guiding questions that we'll look at for each unit in our class. Um, a couple of things I wanted to highlight as we wind up this discussion, and I hope that you might continue the discussion on in the Defining Latin America discussion forum. I'm going to post the video in announcements and there as well, so that you can respond to me there if you like. Um, but what I wanted to point out first and foremost, is that the question I asked you in terms of deciding which one was most convincing was maybe a little bit unfair. And I think a lot of you took that to heart or maybe noticed that, even if you wouldn't have called me unfair, um, because they are complementary perspectives on Latin America. I think it's important to take both into account as we study this place and its people in the modern era, because they presented us with so many different ways of thinking about Latin America. So it's a region, it's a culture, it's language, it's lived experiences, it's stepping outside of your comfort zone and having new experiences, as some of you pointed out in terms of Chasteen's discussion of his own first experiences in Latin America and the kind of culture shock that he felt as an Anglo-American experiencing this place and its people. And of course, he visited very specific places for his research. He talked most about the Southern Cone, which includes Argentina and Chile, as well as some of Brazil. Um, Something that I mean to do if I get enough time is post a map, at least a map, if not something a little bit more, that shows different regions of Latin America so that we can think about the further ways that it's been broken down by scholars and people who live in the area. So my question was a little unfair, but I threw it out that way because I wanted to see what you'd all do with it. And I really learned a lot from the ways that you wrestled with their different approaches to Latin America. The other thing I really want to emphasize is um, one of the first questions you should always ask yourself as you approach the reading for class or any article or book, especially historical ones or academic ones, is the question of what is the author's purpose? What is the author's purpose? What questions is he or she attempting to answer? So for Chasteen, as many of you pointed out, he's trying to write an introduction to his book. The book is a textbook on all of modern Latin American history. He even dips back into the colonial age a little bit. We won't focus on that in as much detail in our class, but it's there. It's in his book, and so he's trying to answer the question of what is Latin America and how can we talk about this place in a unified, cohesive way. Gobat has a very different purpose and different kind of question that he's exploring. He wrote an article for a well-known and reputable academic journal in history, the American Historical Review. So his research focuses on this question of the term Latin America or Latin American itself, trying to decide if the people of Latin America ever kind of took ownership of that term and used it for their own ends, because the prevailing idea prior to his work, at least by most scholars, was that the term Latin America itself was a colonial imposition. French statesmen initially coined it. They used it to describe the region and its people as a way of thinking about a place that they unified in their minds for the purpose of further colonization, whether that was actually taking control of places for the French, which they tried to do in Mexico in the 1860s, or if that was just through economic and political influence. So again, the critique of the term has been that it's used as this kind of colonial imposition from outside. What Gobat shows us is that Latin Americans themselves used it as a way of unifying against imperialist measures. So he is talking about the formation of a Latin American region, but he's really thinking about politics and economics. He's thinking about how elites, policymakers, politicians decided to make that term their own. So it's not just an imposition from outside, but they're calling themselves Latinoamericanos so that they have a means of unifying against European and American, mostly European and American colonial impulses in the mid to late 19th century. So the point here is they have different purposes. They're showing us different things. Something I want to point out as well is there are a couple of you that mentioned that Gobat in particular presented just the facts or merely facts. He did use a lot of facts. So did Chastain, but I think Chastain has a more conversational tone in his work. Some of you pointed out that Gobat's was a bit dry. That maybe is true. But he, again, is trying to address, make a specific argument about the term Latin American, whereas Chastain is doing something different. Both of them are using facts, and facts never speak for themselves. So that was something that we thought about in Unit 1 when we were talking about historical thinking and the 5 C's. There are historical facts. There is historical evidence, but it's always incomplete. It's always fragmentary, the historical record, and the historical record is written by humans. So it's imperfect. People who created primary sources had their own perspectives, their own axes to grind. And so as historians then, we always have to interpret the facts. We always have to explain what they mean and put them in a framework where they have significance. And so I say all of that because this is something that was really hard for me as a student of history. It's taken me a long time to see that there's always an argument, there are always interpretations being made. So I really want to encourage and push you to do the same as we continue our class. So again, I'll post this on the announcements and on the discussion board. I would appreciate any other thoughts that you have to continue our conversation if you just want to respond to me to this one on the discussion forum. And I'll talk to you again soon.